The 49ers set the trend on certain personnel groupings. Personnel groupings, of course, are how you put players on the field and use them a certain way to manipulate a defense. Could the 49ers be going in some other routes and changing up some of their personnel groupings, maybe less percentage of one and running something else? Could recent personnel additions lead to more opportunities for the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan to invoke different type of personnel groupings by the defense? I'm going to get into all that and so much more in this episode of 49ers Cutback.
From the alley-oops at Kezar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is going to be one of my favorite episodes to get into because I love getting into X's and O's and looking at exactly how teams approach other teams. That's why during the season, I love getting into the key matchups of the game and talking about how you would attack the opposing team. And Kyle Shanahan is one of those coaches that finds unique ways to use personnel groupings to go ahead and take advantage of defensive weaknesses. Looking over at a defense is not as much as just looking at the 11 players they have on the field or the coordinator that you're going against, but also looking at who they have as backups or who they have in other personnel groupings and seeing if that presents a better matchup for your football team. Now, of course, variety is the spice of life. When it comes to Kyle Shanahan, he doesn't always tend to go with variety. He has a certain set of personnel groupings that he likes to lock into. Of course, personnel groupings, for those of you who don't know, is how, what type of players you have on the field at one time. There's all kinds of different personnel groupings. There's 21 personnel, which means 2 running backs and 1 tight end. There's 12 personnel, one running back, 2 tight ends. There's 11 personnel, which is a huge trend in the NFL, which is 1 running back, 1 tight end. You kind of just eliminate the third number of receivers, but it's just implied by knowing how many running backs and tight ends you have on the field. There's 5 eligible players that can be able to go out for passes, and then you have the 5 offensive linemen and the quarterback. And that's how you figure out your personnel groupings. And if you've been like some and you've never heard it before, well, I hope I can give you guys a little glimpse into what personnel groupings mean for the 49ers, but also for the NFL and how certain trends dictate how teams not only are built, but what players are out on the field and how defenses can be manipulated into bad situations by good offensive coordinators if they have the right personnel. If you don't have it, you just can't use it. Well, Kyle Shanahan makes sure he always has the personnel that he wants to use. So in this episode, we're going to navigate through what Kyle has done throughout his time as an offensive coordinator for the 49ers and head coach, of course. But we're going to go through what he does and what he attacks and how there could be some new trends and personnel that he's brought in could lend us to believe that new trends are coming from Kyle that could expand the playbook a little, that could change it a little bit. It doesn't mean with things he's going to go away from what's worked, because why would you when you've been one of the best offenses in the league for a long time? But adding new additions and staying ahead of the curve and the NFL trends is exactly what you have to do. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. Also, give a little bit of the examples of the different personnel groupings. It's going to be a lot of fun. But please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today and get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit, up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. So, the game for the 49ers is always interesting, and personnel is going to be a big reason why the 49ers ultimately get the victory that they want to get. They want to get into a certain look and then take advantage of it. And the 49ers run one particular personnel grouping more than anybody else, except there are trends, right? The Houston Texans are running a lot of this now. You look at the Miami Dolphins, they're running a lot of it now, and that's 21 personnel, which is two running backs and one tight end. So what would a personnel grouping like, that look like? Well, this is 21 personnel. As you can see, you've got the tight end, and then you've got the running back here. You've got Kyle Juszczyk, and then there's Christian McCaffrey behind him. So you get the two running backs, you get the one tight end with the two receivers. And so what it looks like as far as personnel groupings is your 21 personnel is going to get you Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk, George Kittle, Ayuk, and Debo on the field together. So two wide receivers, two running backs, and a tight end. How you make up 21 personnel. The 49ers run 21 personnel a lot. It's not exactly the most prevalent. 11 and 12 personnel are the most prevalent packages in the NFL. 21 personnel, though, lately has been definitely coming on with Kyle Shanahan, and then also Kyle Shanahan's coaching tree that's been coming around. Well, 21 personnel, that's two tight ends, one running back, is the 49ers bread and butter. They average 37.8% of usage, the second highest rate in the league, and in line with the league high 34% the year prior. So, as you can see, the 49ers ran it the most in 2022 at 34%. Then they went up to 37.8%, but somebody passed them because you're starting to get more of the 49ers offenses around. And so you're getting more of that 21 personnel. It's a way for you to run, but if you have a dynamic fullback, take advantage of his skill set as well. But when you're looking at what it does to the defense, it puts them in a base defense, a base 4-3 or a base 3-4, which means you find matchups for Christian McCaffrey or Kyle Juszczyk against linebackers or George Kittle. You're trying to find advantages there and advantages in the run game. So that's why Kyle runs it, because most of the league didn't run it. Most of the league runs 11 personnel. And 11 personnel is one running back, one tight end, three wide receivers. That has been the trend basically since Sean McVay took over with the Los Angeles Rams in 2017. He looked at his football team. He wanted to run 21 personnel like him and Kyle had ran with Washington, but he didn't have the personnel to do so. So he saw Cooper Kupp, and he's like, man, I don't want Cooper Kupp sitting on the sideline. Let's go to 11 personnel. What ended up happening was they found very, very good ability to be able to run the football against nickel corners, because if you look back at that time, nickel corners were smaller. They were more of change direction type guys. They just wanted to be able to play coverage, but weren't great when it came to block or playing off blocks and making tackles. So they were taking advantage of that way. So 11 personnel is definitely something that gets ran a lot more, and you get the three wide receivers. When a team's in 11 personnel, the nickel package comes on. That's why the 49ers play defense 70 to 75% of the time in nickel packages, because of the trends of the league. Last year, the 49ers ran 11 personnel, just 38.4% of the plays. That's according to Sumer Sports. That was the second lowest rate in the league. In 2022, they ran it 42.6%. You could see they actually ran more 11 personnel in 2022 than they did 2023. So Kyle Shanahan going to more of a run attack style offense, of course, ran the ball a lot last year, over 48% of the time. So 49ers a little bit different and off the beaten path from other football teams. The fact that their 11 personnel usage is second lowest in the NFL, you kind of look at the way the league goes, and you would think with the 49ers would be within what the league does, but Kyle Shanahan likes to go a little bit different. When you look at 12 personnel, that would put your team with Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Logan Thomas, Brandon Ayuk, and Debo on the field. So this is a run-heavy type offensive scheme. And the reason that it works is you get those two tight ends on the field. If you put them on the same side, it makes it interesting because it creates a heavy set that a defense has to respond to and could potentially create opportunities to run to the weak side. What it also does, though, is potentially keep a team in base. So a lot of times what will happen is a defensive personnel will be dictated by how many tight ends are on the field. You get a two tight end set, and you might keep your base 4-3 or 3-4 defense out there because you have to be able to stop the run. Because you put those two tight ends on the line of scrimmage or even off ball, and you're going to have an extra hole. You're going to have an extra gap that the defense is going to have to cover. So you lose the fullback, but you gain an extra gap, and the angles that produces could help your running game. And so that's why teams do it. They go 12 personnel. 49ers did some 12 personnel last year with when they had, of course, Charlie Warner. Last season, out of pure 12 personnel, which is the 49ers ran at the 8th lowest rate in the NFL. I do think this one's going to have an uptick. So this is the first one I'm telling you. And I 11 personnel, I'm not sure it's going to have an uptick, but I think 12 personnel it could, which the 49ers ran at the 8th lowest rate in the NFL. San Francisco actually had a negative EPA rush. So what happened was when the 49ers went 12 personnel last year, the threat of Charlie Warner going out for a pass was non-existent. So the 49ers couldn't run 12 personnel as much as they wanted with their current personnel because it didn't benefit them as far as their EPA on rushing attack. So teams knew that they could load up and go after the 49ers offense in the run game because they didn't have a second tight end that had the ability to attack them. Well, in comes Logan Thomas. And it's not just the addition of Logan Thomas that leads me to believe there's going to be 12 personnel, but it's also the addition of Mick Lombardi. Mick Lombardi was with the Las Vegas Raiders last season, and he was an offensive coordinator, and now he's a senior offensive assistant for the 49ers. But he spent his time in the early 2010s with the New England Patriots when they had Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, and they run a ton of 12 personnel. And you have one guy that's normally the best pass catcher, one guy that's normally the guy that can block. Well, guess what? You have George Kittle that can do both. And then you have Logan Thomas that does a pretty good job catching the ball, and it makes it pretty interesting. So what it does is it creates mismatches for pass plays against base defenses. And then when teams decide that, hey, we can't take the risk when it comes to the pass and we're going to go into nickel, then what happens is you're able to take advantage of them in the run game in that department. So it creates a more pick your poison type situation. But with the 49ers, they haven't really been able to lean into that. They were trying to. They've tried to get tight ends that would help this 49ers offense be able to lean into that and get it done, but they haven't been able to yet. So 12 personnel hasn't been something they've been able to run a whole lot. In fact, they haven't run it that much at all. And that's something they definitely want to get better at. When you're looking at the numbers for 12 personnel, I'm going to look at it right here. You have a situation where the 49ers ran it 121 snaps last season, which is about 10% of the offense. But when you're looking at what they ran for 21 personnel, they ran that 34% of the time, or 425 snaps last season. So it's pretty impressive when you're looking at what they're doing. Now with 21 personnel, the 49ers threw the ball 44% of the time. So just to look at what they do out of their sets, run plays, 56% of the time, they run more predominantly out of it. You look at 12 personnel, they only threw the ball 38% of the time. That's the Charlie Warner effect. You don't have that legitimate tight end that could win. And so teams didn't have to go to nickel. They could stay in their base and then load up and stop your run, where the 49ers ran the football 62% of the time out of it. So you definitely have an added element adding Logan Thomas to the offense. And you look at your 11 personnel we talked about earlier, and the San Francisco 49ers threw 66% of the time. So when they are in 11 personnel, they're throwing the ball more than they're doing anything else. When it comes to run plays, they ran at 34%, but they had a success rate running in 11 personnel at 52%, including 9 rushing touchdowns at a 4.6 yards per carry average. So when they spread you out and you give them the look that they want, and you run that nickel package, the 49ers will run the football at 11 personnel. That's why I say, depending on what happens, it really will determine, personnel groupings determine how the 49ers have success and what they do. So as we go through these personnel groupings, there's some that are going to be ran more than others. But I think 12 personnel with the addition of Logan Thomas and the addition of Mick Lombardi, we can expect the 49ers to attack defenses that way and put them in that pick your poison type situation. You couldn't do that with Warner. Warner wasn't a legitimate threat catching the football. And, it's unfortunate that you have to say that, but it's just the case. So for the 49ers, they need to make sure, that they're continuing to manipulate, but making a team have to decide between their base defense and their nickel and having to go back and forth. And even then it's confusing because you have 12 personnel. You go to your base package against the 49ers, they can empty out the backfield. They can motion out Christian McCaffrey and find an advantage there because now you just don't have enough defensive backs to be able to handle the players that you have, right? If you have two tight ends and you have one running back, you have two wide receivers. There's your two cornerbacks. You don't have a nickel on the field. So you have your two tight ends, one of them probably covered by a safety, or you're probably running some sort of zone that they can sit down in where you're going to have spacing. You motion Christian McCaffrey out. It reveals whether it's man coverage or not. You can motion him back in, or you can just let him go out and win a matchup that he likes where he can sit down in his zone. So these type of matchups make it very difficult. And I think there's going to be an uptick in 12 personnel for the 49ers with the addition of Logan Thomas. And that's something I've definitely liked. And I like the addition of Mick Lombardi, who saw it work firsthand in New England. And now you're going to get this isn't Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, not the same exact players, but skill set wise, George Kittle, Rob Gronkowski, similar. He's faster than Gronkowski. He blocks better than Gronkowski. But Gronkowski was a real weapon catching the football with that size and ability. But then you've got, Logan Thomas, legit pass receiving threat last year, 55 catches, almost 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. Now let's talk about 22 personnel. The 22 personnel is almost always short yardage. So in that case, you're going to have 2 running backs, 2 tight ends. You're talking McCaffrey, Juice, Kittle, Logan Thomas, and then 1 wide receiver, and it would be Brandon Ayuk running the X position. Now, of course, that could always change. You could have someone else run the X, but for the most part, the X is in those situations. So it's best for short yardage. You can a lot of times get an extra defensive lineman brought in, which means you still have 2 tight ends that can catch the football. You could take advantage of that. So the 49ers ran a lot of 22 personnel as well last year. 9.1 percentage usage rate of 22 personnel was second highest in the league at 7.8% points higher than the NFL average. So it was also 3% percentage points higher than the 22 usage in 2022. So last year they started running more 22 personnel because it's all about dictating what the defense is going to do. So they found that, hey, this is mostly heavy run, so we're going to load up and we're going to make you go to your base set. Are you willing to go do something else? Are you willing to bring in an extra defensive lineman? Are you willing to bring a safety into the box? Maybe that'll give us a good matchup we like on the outside or a good matchup for Christian McCaffrey. So it makes it difficult for these teams. The 49ers, despite not having a second pass-catching tight end, managed to rank first in overall expected points out of the 22 personnel at 0.41 EPA. Their EPA pass was a whopping 1.01, while EPA rush was 0.09. San Francisco only threw it 34.8% of the time out of 22 personnel, and that's where we see a change, where we may see a change this season. So I agree that there's some things the 49ers are going to do now with Logan Thomas that it could help. So we know that there was some struggles for non-George Kittle tight ends last year. They didn't really do a lot in that setting. But these are what the 49ers have been doing, and the trends that they've been going recently was as the league has gotten to quicker, faster nickel corners and personnel groupings, smaller linebackers, some teams are trending towards loading up and going with more big running backs and more big sets to get more extra yardage. And the 49ers have been trending in that direction as well. More 21 personnel than 2022, more 22 personnel. Now I think more 12 personnel. Those are loaded up with packages. So how do you explain then, if you're the 49ers, why you go and you draft Ricky Pearsall? And it might be as simple as saying, hey, yeah, we're preparing for the future. What happens if this is Brandon Ayuk's last year? I think that's always a good way to look at it. You look at players you could bring in for the future. But if you were going to be Ricky Pearsall in the first round, you're expecting him to help your team now because you're trying to win a Super Bowl now. Well, what effect could Ricky Pearsall have on this team? What effect could Jacob Cowling have on this team in 2024. I think there are some avenues the 49ers could go to produce some interesting personnel groupings and cause some real mishaps for defenses. So, looking at who the 49ers have brought in, the personnel, and how Kyle Shanahan likes to manipulate defenses, these are going to be some personnel groupings that I think Kyle Shanahan could go to. And one of them I'm going to start with is 10 personnel. And what 10 personnel would mean is first off, you're bringing George Kittle off the field. Christian McCaffrey is the one running back, and then there's four wide receivers. We haven't seen the 49ers run this type of grouping very often. When you look at 10 personnel, it's just not used very much by the 49ers. In fact, last year, 10 personnel, the 49ers ran it one time. One time. But they didn't really have four wide receivers that were going to have that kind of success. Now, of course, in that one play, they did have, they did throw the football. It was an incomplete pass. It wasn't a fast pass. They were trying to get the ball out quickly. But I think this could change a little bit. Some of these other personnel groupings because of the addition of Ricky Pearsall. So your personnel grouping out there would be Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall. Now, 10 personnel is kind of more common when you're talking about college and high school. It's not as common in the NFL, but it's starting to make a move in the NFL. Teams are definitely starting to go that. So it's interesting to do that. Now, defenses would have to spread to match the offense, allowing lighter boxes for the running backs to run against. The running back who can also stay and pass protect for deeper passing concepts. So you're still trying to manipulate. So this is one of those ones that's tough for defenses. Do they go nickel? It could produce a bad matchup for their safety or a linebacker, or do they go dime and potentially struggle against stopping the run? Because when you look at the 49ers wide receivers they're going to have on the field, we know that Brandon Ayuk and Juwan Jennings are good blockers. McCaffrey's still a good running back. So spreading the team out could be huge for the 49ers. They stay nickel to try to stop the run. You find an advantage to pass because you have four wide receivers out wide. That spreads the field. Even if you're running zone, you're spreading the field a little bit. Could be some opportunities for McCaffrey now that they have four legitimate threats at wide receiver. You also throw in the fact that you can manipulate anytime you have Deebo on the field where he can motion in the backfield and all of a sudden you have a two running back look. So the 49ers know that they can use this type of, personnel grouping to their advantage. This is where I start nerding out and having a lot of fun looking at what they could do. So creates a light box to be able to run the football, but some interesting matchups. And you could easily motion McCaffrey out, go five wide receivers. If they're a nickel, they're at a disadvantage. They need to be in dime. If they're in dime, they're at a disadvantage in the run game. So lots of interesting things there. You could also run some of those quick screens. So it makes for a lot of fun when you're going through. Another one that we haven't seen the 49ers run at all, and I mean at all. This is just not something that they like to do. They did it 0 times. Zero. None. In 2023, but it could actually be a possibility for the 49ers moving forward is 0 running backs. Now, what is the downfall of having 0 running backs? Well, they know you're not going to run the ball, right? Christian McCaffrey on the field, that's never a good idea. But here is the one caveat that is different for the 49ers than any other team in the league. They have a Deebo Samuel. Not every team has a Deebo Samuel. So if you're in the 0 personnel package, there's 0 running backs, 0 tight ends, and 5 wide receivers. When a lot of times when people see empty, they automatically say, oh, we're 5 wide. It's not 5 wide receivers. A lot of times George Kittle's on the field, Christian McCaffrey's on the field, 3 receivers. It's usually 11 personnel, but we have an empty set. Empty means no one in the backfield. So it's not 5 wide receivers, it's empty. It's a little bit different. And this is a lot of time used in, the most common of passing situations. It can be really good for bubble and wide receiver screens, but it automatically produces a dime defense. So a dime defense means that you've pulled 2 linebackers off the field. So with nickel, you pull one of your base linebackers off the field, you put your nickel corner out. You go dime, you pull 2. So now you're running with 1 linebacker. Now, of course, sometimes you could change that, right? You could easily go with pull a defensive lineman off the field and go ahead and leave a linebacker, but you're losing someone somewhere. And that's what you have to decide. A lot of teams will go 1 linebacker, and that's how they'll go about it. Some will go 1 less defensive lineman, which means you have less pressure to put on the quarterback. not always the best idea if you just rush three. So you get a dime defense. But imagine the wrinkle you have by being able to put Debo Samuel in the backfield. You go to this, personnel, a zero personnel, and they know they got five wide receivers. They're not preparing for Debo Samuel to run the football, but you can still run. That might put the opposing defense in a real predicament. And just watching the receiver show, you can listen to Kyle talk about Debo Samuel and how he is one of the most dynamic wide receivers and playmakers in the entire league. Well, part of it is what has he done since 2021? Better than any other wide receiver and almost better than any running back. Score touchdowns from 10 plus yards out. Here's an opportunity to spread a defense out, get a personnel grouping that is not meant to stop the run, and then put Debo Samuel back there to stop the run. And why can you do it? Well, you can create spacing, but also you can use Jawan Jennings and Brandon Ayuk. And Jawan Jennings can even be a lead blocker in some categories. You could put some real hurt on some of these teams, but him also in the bubble wide receiver, screen game could be absolutely fantastic. So I think right now, 10 personnel, one running back, no tight ends could be used, zero personnel. And I don't think these are going to be used significantly. I think you pick certain moments where you use them and you hit it. And so it's not like it's going to go up to a big amount. These aren't going to be huge changes. They're going to be subtle. Maybe like all of a sudden you start seeing these things make up, 3 or 4% in totality. But it's enough to get some interesting wrinkles on your offense and be able to do some things. Another one that's going to be interesting, and this one, once again, takes Christian McCaffrey off the field, which I'm not sure is always the best idea. But if you're going to give him a break, why not run a personnel grouping like this that could make some changes? And that's one personnel. You get George Kittle out there on the field with four wide receivers. And so you have the tight end. He can still block. He can still do all those things. But you have the opportunity. What does it produce? A dime package. And of course, you don't want Christian McCaffrey off the field, but what about some of the matchups that you're going to get as far as unique matchups against the defensive dime package? You're number one, they don't want to run dime when you have a tight end on the field, but they might have to. And so he could stay in, be a six blocker, allow your four wide receivers to be able to get extra time to get work. You could also use him as an off-ball guy and go ahead and motion Debo back. And once again, now, what do you have? You have a potential running situation against a dime look. It's all about finding matchups that work best. And you could find some of these unique matchups because of the 49ers personnel. 49ers personnel is more unique than any other team in the entire NFL. The fact they got George Kittle, a tight end that can do all. They've got running backs that can do all, like Christian McCaffrey. They got a wide receiver like Debo that can win in the backfield. He can win out wide. He's a dynamic playmaker. What it does is it just makes it difficult. And when you start getting into some of these personnel groupings that aren't familiar to teams around the league, how they play them is going to be difficult. Now, Kyle not knowing how they're going to play them could somewhat slow him down from running these, but if he thinks he's got a good idea or he knows that, hey, I want to get their dime back on the field because that's a matchup I like, let's get Jawan on him blocking, or let's get Pearsall on him and catch the ball. There's little things like that that you can invoke for certain matchups that could produce first downs or key plays that you really need. So to me, those are some unique matchups you could take advantage of. And then, of course, here's one that you never thought the 49ers would run. But how about a two personnel where you get Kittle, Logan Thomas, Brandon Ayuk, Debo, and Jawan Jennings on the field? No running backs, two tight ends, and three wide receivers. This is a difficult one to manage. Now, most teams would say, hey, I don't really have to worry about this whole lot. We'll just go to our nickel or dime package. We'll just cover these guys up. No worries. But when you got Debo as part of that package, it could easily change into 12 personnel because all of a sudden Debo becomes a running back. You have Logan Thomas and George Kittle to help block. You got Jawan Jennings and Brandon Ayuk, and they came out expecting to stop two personnel, which they would normally play against any other team in the league one certain way, one personnel grouping that they would go ahead and they would play it in a dime. They would just spread out, not worried about it, go ahead for coverage. There's no running backs. But Debo's there. This is that Debo effect. Now Debo motions into the backfield pre-snap. You've got two tight ends on the field. Now it's 12 personnel. That is the difficult part of stopping the 49ers with all these mixtures of groups. And as you could tell, I get excited about this stuff. As a former offensive coordinator, this is the type of stuff you do when you're game planning and you're looking at teams and how you're going to use your personnel in the best way to be successful. And this is some of those things you do. And I know you don't want Debo running the ball all the time, but one or two times a game, you find these unique matchups you could take advantage of. Could all of a sudden get an explosive, get a key first down, maybe overcome a penalty. These are things that you can do. So some teams might try to go to a base set depending on how they read tight end. Some might go to nickel, some might go to dime, and you can manipulate them to get the look you want. If they stay in base, boom, check the pass, go ahead and throw the football. If they want to go to a dime, boom, check the run, give it to Debo Samuel, and let the tight ends block with the extra gaps. It could be explosive. Those are some really cool stuff. Now, of course, other personnel groupings just to look at that I don't expect the 49ers to run a whole lot is 13 personnel. That's one running back, three tight ends. That would be McCaffrey, Kittle, Logan Thomas, a guy like Braden Willis, and then Brandon Ayuk. These would be used more in run first packages. And of course, these are like the stretch run plays, things like that. You could also run a lot of wham blocking using tight ends to trap defensive linemen and defensive ends. 49ers can run that. I don't think they'll go a lot of three tight end, but with Cameron Latu, Braden Willis, maybe Eric Saubert, they could go to some of it. So I wanted to mention it so you guys know, that there's a potential of them running 13 personnel. It is a lot of times used to force defenses to add more players to the box, which, so your manipulation. I either want to add players to the box or I want to spread players out so I can get the best I can out of it. And then 20 personnel, which would be two running backs and zero tight ends. Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk, Brandon Ayuk, Debo, and Jawan. You don't get to see it in the NFL very often. 20 personnel is not something that a lot of teams run in the NFL. In fact, the 49ers ran it twice last season. So it's not something that's normal. They never ran the football out of it in those two plays. They just threw it twice. They had two pass attempts. They completed one of those pass plays. So this is, something we could see more of. 49ers expanding some of the things they never ran last year. And there were things that they just never really got into. They ran no 5 wide receiver sets last year. Not surprising. They just, didn't want to go to that. They didn't run a lot of, 3 running back sets last year. Some teams in the league did that. They didn't do that. They did run one play where they had 3 running backs on the field and 2 tight ends. And of course, they ran the football now, and that's a short yardage situation. So there's lots of cool things the 49ers could do with personnel. 20 personnel would be one of them. Now, of course, the likelihood is the 49ers are going to do what they always do. They're going to live in 21 personnel. They're going to run that the most. That's what they did last year, 37.8% of the time. If they're not in that, they'll probably spend some of the time in 11 personnel. But they did that, less than most of the league last year, 38.4% of the time. It's not up there. That's the second lowest rate in the NFL. And then I think there's going to be an uptick in 12 personnel, and we're seeing it around the league. And I think the 49ers are going to get involved in that. Mick Lombardi, Logan Thomas, add to all that. It's going to be a lot of fun. The 49ers win by using personnel groupings to find the best matchups. The cool thing is, with the addition of Ricky Pearsall, the addition of Logan Thomas, the 49ers now have the ability to run more personnel groupings than ever before. Now, you could have ran them before, but successfully run them. Logan Thomas is a legitimate threat now in your 12 personnel, your 22 personnel. You can now throw from those. You line up against the 49ers in heavy run sets, you have to face the consequences in the passing game and vice versa. Then you add Ricky Pearsall, and now all of a sudden you can run 4 wide receiver sets. That's good. You could run 10 personnel. Now, do you want to bring George Kittle out the field? No, but every once in a while when you find a matchup you like, you go ahead and you do that. Now, when McCaffrey motions out, you have 5 legitimate receivers because he's a problem. So do you stay in nickel with McCaffrey or do you go to dime? Those little subtle nuances and changes can definitely put the 49ers in better situations to be successful. And that's how Kyle Shanahan can win with personnel groupings. And we've seen him consistently do it throughout the time. I had a lot of fun talking through this episode. And if you have questions about personnel groupings, let me know. You guys can always ask comments. I would love to get into it, and talk more. If you're a channel member and you want to have a deeper conversation or a Patreon, let me know, and I'll definitely connect with you about personnel groupings and just X's and O's and football. I love talking that part of it. It's one of my favorite things to do. But Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. Of course, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers.